Welcome back to another episode of the Catholic Buzz podcast. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Father Daniele, and I'm joined by Josh Sullivan.
Hello.
Welcome, Josh.
Thank you.
And Matt Van Milligan.
Hi.
Welcome to you. So we are, when people hear our podcast or watch our podcast on YouTube, by the time they see it or hear it, it's not always when we record it.
No.
And we record it sometimes a few days in advance, sometimes depending on our schedule. And so what we have the benefit of today, because we just learned today, and we had a different topic for today's episode, but we had news released this morning from the Vatican, so it was fresh news. It was a declaration from the Dicastery of the Doctrine of Faith, saying basically that it was on the pastoral meaning of blessings. It was a document declaration called Fiducia Supplicans, and basically saying that people in irregular situations, couples in irregular situations, couples in same-sex relationships could receive a blessing from their priest. And so I remember reading it this morning, really early in the morning in Italian, because the English translation hadn't come out yet. And I knew it was going to be an interesting day. And here's, obviously we're going to talk about it today, and what does it really mean? But I just want to give you a sense of what happens anytime the church gives some sort of teaching. We have this problem with how it's reported in the media. So here's what the headlines say today, and I just am doing a Google search for news. And here are the headlines. Pope Francis approves allowing priests to bless same-sex couples. Okay, then there's an article. This Catholic priest is looking forward to blessing same-sex couples. Of course, that's our favorite priest, Father James Martin, of controversial nature. Then there's headlines like this. Vatican gives conditional approval to blessings for same-sex couples. Pope Francis allows blessing of same-sex couples, shifting Vatican guidance. Okay. Pope Francis green lights blessings for same-sex couples. Okay, so all these headlines come out, and of course, it's garnering lots of social media, chat, lots of reaction from priests, bishops, laity, commentators, news outlets. So we're going to talk a little bit about what the document actually says.
I think that's good. I think it's a clarification that if you're a Catholic that only gets your news from, your teaching of Catholic teaching from the news, there's something sorely wrong.
Definitely.
And so you need to go back to the source. And I think if you haven't learned that yet, for everything, not just Catholic news, but everything, every kind of news, you got to go back to the source because the media always twists it. Whether adding their own spin in or whatever else. Then the very first thing that you pointed out was irregular couples. So this isn't only just about homosexual couples. This is also about divorced couples. This is about maybe couples that aren't actually wed yet, like boyfriend, girlfriend living together, common law, those types of things. So this is encompassing a lot of different things going on. But the news is making it about one specific subject.
And we had a separate episode on can you trust the media or those things? If you're trusting the news for your account of this, you're missing a lot of the detail. But a lot of people don't even get past the headlines. Some of what we'll talk about is just kind of the responsibility in representing church teaching, in kind of communicating church teaching to other people. And the Dicastery now, for the Doctrine of the Faith, they release these precise documents. They're long, they're detailed, and usually in response to a precise debate or a precise distinction between kind of theological claims. Headlines, by definition, are imprecise. They are, deliberately vague and are, aimed at garnering attention. So
and garnering money.
Exactly. There's a market.
There's a market for it. Okay, so I want to just talk about the distinction here between, because this document, this declaration, is 45 paragraphs long. Okay,
Yeah.
and it's actually a decent read. Like, it's not theologically dense or anything. So if people want to read it for themselves, by all means,
Let's
go
throw a link in our
online.
comments or whatever.
Yeah, it's available on the Vatican website. So it's available now in all sorts of different languages. But it's 45 paragraphs long. And let me just say that for the first 30 paragraphs of this 45 paragraph document, the document talks about the importance of the sacrament of marriage as being between a man and a woman in a fruitful, exclusive, stable, indissoluble union. Okay, so that's what's being talked about almost in the first 30 paragraphs. And it talks about blessings then. So here's where I want to make a distinction for people listening at home. There's a difference between blessing a marriage and bestowing a blessing on someone.
Yeah.
And I think the media is confusing the two today.
Yeah.
Like, I've had people say to me, they go get married in somewhere hot, and then they say, when we come back, can the church bless our marriage? And what they're really asking for is a convalidation, right? And but people use the word blessing for marriage.
Yeah.
Like, we had our marriage blessed. You've heard people say that.
Yeah, for sure.
So when the headline in media says Vatican approves blessing of same-sex couples, people automatically think, oh, the church is now allowing same-sex couples to get married.
Yes.
That's not the case. That's not the case. What the document is saying is that there's meaning to various blessings, and it gives sort of a history of blessings from the Old Testament and the New Testament, and so blessings in sacred scripture, how people are it's God who blesses. People respond to blessings. It uses examples of Melchizedek blessing Abram. Rebecca is blessed by her family members. That's the Old Testament. In the New Testament, they're using other examples as well of blessing. And then it talks about a theological understanding of blessing, right? So basically, if I was to say what a blessing is, because I, as a priest, I give blessings, let's say, to rosaries or cars or houses, Bibles, and so that's one type of blessing.
Yeah,
and it's to make those things, special and holy. And then there's blessings for people. So I would bless your family. I would bless people before they go on a trip.
Yeah,
people before they go to surgery. People when they're I just need a little extra strength today. I need a blessing.
Sometimes before you leave the house, we'd be, oh, Father, can we have your blessing?
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like those types of things, too.
Right.
We can just,
And never, let me just say that never, when someone has asked for one of those blessings, have I asked them to produce for me what their state of grace is. Right?
Yeah.
A marriage certificate or what they're living as. Or
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
And further than that, like some of the situations, or maybe even a majority of the situations that people would ask for a blessing from are kind of what's producing their struggle. So if someone was struggling with addiction comes and asks for a blessing, we're like, well, did you overcome your alcoholism? Because like you don't make your blessing conditional on whether they're outside of that the condition that's causing them to struggle. Yeah.
No, and in fact, I think even the document specifically talks about like blessing in this context is asking God to come into the situation, God to bless the situation, meaning for God to be more prevalent in the situation so that it can uplift whatever the addiction or whatever the case may be at that time. And so we bless specifically sinners. The one problem is, though, that I just kind of want to point out is that we use blessing many different ways, as you said. Yeah. But one of the ways in marriage is like, will the Father bless this union? Will have you asked my Father for my hands in marriage? Oh yeah, your Father's given his blessing. You know what I mean? Like those are the types of, but
like an approval.
In that case, it's approval, and so that's where the mix-up is coming in. Here.
Right.
We don't use blessing as approval.
Yeah.
And that's not what we're talking about here. We're using blessing as asking God's divine grace into the situation, and that can kind of happen anywhere where there's another human being, right? And so asking God to come into a human being's life is never, and I think that's what this whole document is kind of trying to focus on here, is that it doesn't matter what the person's doing or how the person is. It's asking God's situation if the person is asking for God to come into their life in a different way, in a more holy way, then the priest is allowed to ask for that. You know what I mean?
That's right.
Is to grant that blessing. The difference is to bless the union or bless the sin or whatever else, and that's the part that is not being made clear.
That's the precise distinction that the document is making.
Exactly.
That the headlines are missing, or that
missing.
people who are reacting strongly.
In fact, in the document, in paragraph 28, mentions, I don't know, you guys have probably seen, like, sometimes I pull out a book of blessings.
Yeah.
Like, depending on if I go bless a home or go bless something, like, I'll bring my book with me because there's,
A bunch of different kinds of blessings.
There's an order of blessings sort of thing. So it mentions that there are several things in this book of blessings that priests can use. And it specifically says that these types of blessings that are being approved or suggested for couples in irregular situations or same-sex couples, that the bishops' conferences are not to now provide like an order of blessing for irregular situations. Yeah. It's saying that these blessings should be more spontaneous, unplanned, and should not resemble any liturgical rite. Yeah. Like it's not in the front of the church when the priest is wearing his chasuble.
It even talks about the apparel and the dress of of everybody, right?
Right.
Like
it's not in the backyard when friends and family are gathered together. Like nothing that resembles a wedding
planned situation
or things like that. It's like I've had the situation like as I greet people leaving mass. They come to me and say, Father, can you give me a blessing today because of whatever reason? Yeah. That's what I would say. That's a spontaneous blessing. Oh, sure. Yeah. Hey, what can we pray about today? What do you need? So that's another distinction that's being made by this document as well. Okay, so then we talked about the first 30 paragraphs, just like that. Yeah. So paragraphs 31 to 41 talks about now blessing irregular situations and couples of the same sex. And it's again starts by saying, I'm going to quote a few things here, okay? It says, it should not be fixed ritually, like I said, by ecclesial authorities in order to avoid producing confusion with blessing proper to the sacrament of marriage. And it says that we remember that blessings have an ascending value, but also a blessing that blessings descend from God, right? It's given to people who recognize themselves to be, I'm quoting, destitute and in need of his help, and not claiming a legitimation of their own status.
So it's specifically saying that a blessing is not about approval.
Exactly.
It is about saying to God, I need your help.
Exactly. Which blessings...
That's what a blessing is.
That's what a blessing is.
And it's making that distinction when we're talking about blessings here. That's what it is.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's saying that, so they're not claiming legitimation of their status, but people rather who are begging that things that are true, good, and humanly valid in their lives and their relationships can be enriched, healed, and elevated by the presence of the Holy Spirit, right? We invoke the Holy Spirit with us when we receive a blessing. These forms of blessing, it says, express a supplication that God may grant those aids that come from the impulses of the Spirit so that human relationships may mature and grow in fidelity to the gospel and that they may be freed from their imperfections and frailties. And when I think of when I ask for blessings from priests and things, that's the thing. It's like it's always like for help. It's always for help that the Holy Spirit can kind of guide me in the right direction, can kind of lift me up out of maybe a situation that I'm in or whatever it is. So that's where I'm gonna say I don't know if much has changed.
I don't think anything has changed
because I don't think as a priest, if someone who has same-sex attraction came to me and asked for a blessing, that I don't even ask. If someone asks me for a blessing, I'm not asking about their sexual attraction.
Yeah.
I'm not asking about those things. This is mentioning, however, couples.
Yeah.
Right. So a couple comes to me. Now think about this. If a younger couple,
Yeah.
like let's say a boyfriend and a girlfriend, so a heterosexual couple comes, they're not married, they are perhaps
Struggling with chastity.
struggling with chastity. Matt, you always have a way with words. And they ask me for a blessing. I'm not asking about their struggles in chastity, right? If two people with same-sex attraction came and asked for a blessing, I don't know if I'd even notice, or you know what I mean. I don't think I'd even. I definitely wouldn't ask what the maybe I'd ask what's going on in your life, like what can we pray about, but I'm not asking for a list of their grace or a list of their sins either.
Yeah. And
right?
the kind of blessing that's being conferred doesn't require you to scrutinize the situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's and we're not praying that the Lord will strengthen their union of love. We're praying for the grace of God to help them in their lives. So while some people are making a big deal of it, for me it's not that big of a deal. Yeah. Now for people who might just read the headlines and see like,
a lot of confusion.
The church is blessing unions of same-sex couples, maybe a lot is happening. Now, some people are pointing towards a 2021 document from the same dicastery. Then it was the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith. Now, this was in answer to some questions, right?
Yep.
And it was a response to some questions about blessing same-sex unions. This was it says, does the church have the power to give the blessing to unions of persons of the same sex? And the answer was no. And this made headlines because it had some strong language. It says at the end, it says the church recalls that God himself never ceases to bless each of his children in the world, but he does not and cannot bless sin.
Yeah.
He blesses sinful man so that he may recognize that he is part of his plan of love and allow himself to be changed by him. He, in fact, takes us as we are, but never leaves us as we are. So this, to me, was answering a question about unions of same-sex couples. Whereas some priests, I know it's only early, it's today that's being released, some priests are saying that it's a big shift from this document that was released 2 years ago by the same dicastery, signed by the same pope.
Yeah.
Like today's announcement or declaration.
2 years ago.
And 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? So to me, I might be wrong here, but I'm thinking there's a difference.
The two seem perfectly aligned because, again, you said the first 30 paragraphs of today's declaration are saying that, like, the union, nothing has changed here. This doesn't represent a change in how we understand and
marriage or anything else. Yeah.
Yeah, but again, the headlines, or even people who have kind of an agenda to misrepresent or shift some of the wording, are using kind of the blessing that's conferred upon individuals with the blessing of the situation or blessing of the union itself. If they're using those terms interchangeably, that creates the confusion. Whereas the 2021 declaration specifies the union itself is not what's blessed. The church blesses people.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So where are we at here with this?
That's what I was going to say. So, the Catholic Church has not permitted or not said that, hasn't changed its teaching, let's say, on what marriage is. Has not. And in fact, if anything, it's made it very clear, I'm going to say, through this declaration to specify exactly what it's saying that marriage is, and that's not changing. Mm-hmm. The next part is that, so then what is it saying? It's talking about specifically what a blessing is, and making it clear what a blessing actually is, what a blessing does, why we ask for blessings from God. And so then, will people be confused, I think, is the next question. And
so my question is, like, why release this today?
Yes.
Like, why release it today? Because on one hand, you have some confusion being created, right? That maybe is unnecessary. We don't need to create more confusion than we need to. And on the other hand, I would say that this was released for pastoral reasons, that people in irregular situations or same-sex relationships, perhaps maybe if they even are practicing the Catholic faith, might feel excluded.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the big part, I think, but it is specific to be released today. I don't think it's not released in November. It's not waited till January. I think it's released right before Christmas. And I think that is on purpose. And I think the reason why it's on purpose is so that we can have great discussions around the Christmas dinner table. Yeah. No, I think I think the reason though is because maybe where these couples, whether they be divorced couples or regular couples or whatever the case may be, homosexual couples. These are the people, like, one of the things that we do, we talk about C&E Catholics, right? The ones that go to Christmas and Easter, that's it. These are the times where you get family together, and maybe this family is not attending Mass anymore, not practicing their Catholic values or anything else, and might be their lifestyle or it might be what they feel the church is doing. But this is the perfect opportunity for families now to come back together, to understand that they are welcomed at the church. They can't necessarily be in full communion with the church yet, meaning that they can't be in full communion with the church. That's not what but they can still go to the church. This church still wants to bring them to Christ. They still wants to, like, we're all sinners. The church is not like you got to get fixed first and then you can come to church. This is like we're all going to the hospital to get fixed, that whole thing. You know what I mean? And I think the church is releasing it now so that people can feel welcomed or loved or accepted and invited back to church. Does that make sense? Like at Christmas time.
Yeah, and I think like if you follow or watch many of the kind of like popular Catholic commentators, you might think that the DDF released this declaration, just to get the self-proclaimed faithful all riled up and angry. I was like, but no, there's that kind of that pastoral focus. On the one hand, that it's like, okay, this is a time of year. It was like when people who feel alienated from the church, like no one is ineligible for
a blessing.
A blessing. So extending that olive branch, making that clear that like nobody is on the outside. It was like, but also, this also serves as a kind of correction for agents within the church who are pushing for that full recognition of like this is a clarification for something like the German bishops who are let's go the whole 9 yards and no, this is the precise distinction that the church makes. This is the deposit of faith. It invalidates kind of those kind of more aggressive agendas as well.
While the headlines are making things more gray, this document actually serves to make things in the church specifically and for pastoral care, make things more black and white, make more rules, not more rules, but more guidelines, exactly what is allowed to happen, what is not allowed to happen. Yeah. Like specifically even saying like that it cannot resemble the ritual of marriage. Mm-hmm. It has to be spontaneous. Like these are very specific things that we didn't have before. And while people could argue, well, you could just bless anyone. You know what I mean? And the church is saying, yeah, you can. Yeah. It was making a very specific distinctions here so that it doesn't become something. Yeah. You know what I mean? I think it's putting it more black and white. Mm-hmm. Although the media and it's making it more gray and confusing. If you actually read the document in its fullness, I think it's being more clear.
And if the pastoral reason for releasing a declaration on this to make it clear for people, if that's going to bring peace to someone's heart, if that's going to
or to a family situation,
or exactly, then great, because I would hate to think that people feel like whatever state of life that they're in, that they can't receive a blessing.
They're not welcomed in the church.
That they're not welcome. I would hate for them to feel that way. So if that's the purpose of the document, then great. People feel a little more welcome. People feel like they're being heard. People feel like they're being drawn back to God, and I think that's great. The problem, the Vatican, I don't think understand. Maybe they do understand. It's not their fault. They release these teachings. They release these declarations
to make it clear.
And of course, something like this would grab media attention, right? So that's something that they can't control.
I'm gonna say that. Okay.
Oh no, and you could make a good case that may not necessarily be aware of how much people are influenced by the headlines, by the media. That's from a communication standpoint alone. Again, that they could be kind of more strategic and more kind of communicate at various different levels and have a different kind of pastoral chain of communication. But that aside, the real culpability, or like if there is confusion created, the goal of the document, and hopefully like the reason the CDF existed and the DDF exists, is to provide that clarity, is to clarify, is to illuminate. But what we get, and in practical sense too, there's confusion. But it's like, okay, where does that obfuscation come? And again, it's those intermediaries who are either accidentally or deliberately kind of misrepresenting, muddying something that is intended to clarify.
I think, and the devil can't create; it can only twist, right? And that's kind of one of those things. Now, I got to be honest, as a person that I feel like works on, I'm going to call the front lines of the church. Working with youth, working with young adults, working with and working with people and answering these types of questions. It feels like to me, I'm a soldier on the war front, and my general just gave the enemy a bunch of blank artillery, and it's not going to hurt me. It really isn't going to hurt me. It doesn't has anything to do with me, but it's just going to confuse the heck out of the battlefield. And when I read that this morning, when I saw what's going on there, I was like, oh my goodness, this is just going to cause so much confusion. And then when I read into it and stuff, I said, okay, no, this is not meant to create like the intention. I think it's about the intent. And so what you have is now, what is the intent of the people that are now reporting it? So you have certain priests, you have the United States bishops, you have the church itself, as well as the dicastery. Their intent is to clarify and to make very clear what's going on. The news and media and other, like you said, intermediate people are reporting on it. Their intent maybe is to not necessarily modify, but is to push their own agenda, which would be to push a very specific way of life, or to to legitimize something that maybe the church is not saying.
Yeah. Well, and there's an onus on us as well, because like even looking at kind of the practical fallout, it's like, well, what does this mean for me? It's like, okay, our RCIA session might go 20 minutes longer because somebody brings this up, or something. Years ago, I thought the Pope said, this is all dogs go to heaven.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of, or like that kind of thing. It's like, okay, well, what's the outcome? Like, okay, that 20 minutes is probably a pretty fruitful discussion.
You're right.
And there's an opportunity to provide clarity and respond to the actual concerns and questions that people actually have.
Yeah, I think in the end, it's going to make good Catholics that are people that are searching for the truth is what I'll say. People that are actually searching for the truth, it's going to make them stronger and get them and make them. People that are not searching for the truth, they're just looking for a gossip column, then that's going to happen. But that's like the next big thing is going to come along and it's going to be forgotten. Sure. The problem is that you're going to have those Catholics that don't look into their faith, and they're going to just remember the headlines.
Yeah.
Exactly, and one of the things we don't want to forget here, because the headlines focus on same-sex couples, but couples in irregular situations as well. So those who are divorced and remarried, who a lot of people who are divorced and remarried feel excluded from the church, or feel like the church maybe doesn't want them or whatever, which is not the case. There's always
there's been lots of news media about like whether a divorced couple and that are remarried can receive communion or not. Like we've talked about this a little bit on the show, but there's been a lot, like those are all different things. Common law marriage, if you're not actually in union with the church. Well, and we've talked about before, is it your first? Is it your second? Like what's going on here that we can, there's a lot of confusion around that whole area, I think, but this is proving to clarify certain aspects. In, like you said, every area of what we would consider in the church an irregular relationship. Yeah,
and like I think there's confusion seems to be what a lot of people understand about the church, right? Like single mothers think that they can't bring their child for baptism. Like divorced couples think that they can't come to mass. Like there's all these things that people misunderstand or are confused about, that I think maybe this declaration today might help people in irregular situations to come back to the church, right? Or at least not feel as excluded. Like I said, I'm not sure how many people will take a declaration like this and start running towards the doors of a church, right? Because we also have to keep in mind that every declaration from the church, every teaching of the church comes from the foundation of our faith in Jesus Christ, right? Like everything flows from that. We're not just making arbitrary decisions about who gets to receive a blessing, who gets to get married, who gets to do these things, right? Yeah. Like we're all called to grow in our love for Christ and to grow in holiness. that's what blessings are supposed to do as well. They're supposed to help us to grow in holiness as well. It's not just a situation where we just come for a blessing because it's one of those nice things to get, right? Every blessing, everything that's imparted to us by God is to help us to grow in holiness. So whether we're in regular situations, irregular situations, if we're a same-sex couple or whatever it is, if we're on the path to holiness and our heart and our mind is open to that, then we continually are drawing ourselves closer to God. A blessing will help with that. But if we're being obstinate in not opening our heart, our mind to the Lord, then I don't think the people in those situations really care about today's headline. You know,
Whether you're a irregular couple or whether you're in a married couple, like
exactly,
it's just the same way, right?
So while the Vatican, I think, is trying to help people to grow in holiness, or to at least be maybe invited to holiness, you know, some people might be interested. You know, like we mentioned, our friend Father James Martin, of course, he had something to say about this today, and he's saying he can't wait to bless same-sex couples, and of course, all the media has gone to him for interviews today because he is known for his support and sometimes controversial support of the LGBT community. And so we will continue to have people who, even though the declaration is pretty clear to me, the declaration is pretty clear. It's like this is not affecting the sacrament of marriage. Like the USCCB, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, already have had to send out clarification saying like, hey, I know this has made headlines today, but this has not changed the church's teaching on marriage. So they've sent out a clarification. So we're going to continue to have people who sort of blow up this and push the envelope a little bit, right? Like Father James Martin says in this interview with the CBC, that this is another stepping stone. It's a big step towards something else. And it's like, well, I don't know if it's a big step to anything because
nothing's changed.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm going to disagree with him here. He says that he has not been able to bless couples of the same sex. I don't know what context he's talking about here. Like if a person with same-sex attraction came up to him and asked for a blessing, I mean, I wouldn't refuse a blessing just because someone has a same, and I'm talking about a blessing like you know, spontaneous, back of the church, pray over pray over them.
Yeah,
I wouldn't refuse that to someone. I doubt he would, right? But he's saying in this interview that he can finally do that.
Well, and again, I think what it's suggesting, it's not what is being said, because if the words are being chosen very carefully, but what's suggesting there is that the blessing is the same as blessing the union.
Well, and you can tell that the person interviewing him here on the CBC is asking questions based on that. Like, and their understanding was that is the Vatican blessing unions? Like, is allowing marriages or unions of same-sex couples,
and they're taking little blocks, and that's what we talk about. They're specific. They're blocking out and adding their own context to what he's saying to make it appear to be the way that he's talking.
That's right,
and that's the media, though.
If I could give a word of advice to people of goodwill, you know, don't learn about the Catholic Church from CBC, and maybe not even Father James Martin. I'm not sure, So what I'm trying to say, I guess, is that today's just day one. This news was released today. Even by the time this episode airs, when people are listening to this episode, maybe more has come out and more commentary or more controversy or more whatever. You know, that could happen in just a few days before we release this episode. But I want people to know that we always go back to the source of the documents.
That's right.
We don't learn about church teaching from the TV, from the media, from the newspaper, from interviews, whatever. We learn about it from the documents. And if we're going to read this document, if we're going to read the document that was released today, the declaration that was released today, like I said, it's a short read and it's not theologically dense. It's easy to read. And I think it teaches, it's a really good teaching about the meaning of blessings
Yeah.
and the history of blessings in the Old Testament, the New Testament, all these different things. And the theological understanding of blessings as well. So I would encourage people to go there.
I think what we need to do is now take it to the point of prayer. So what we need to do is pray for our priests, pray for our deacons, because I would imagine that blessing would also confer to them. They could bless, so our priests, our deacons, our bishops, so that they can uphold this teaching properly and not make any more confusion with it, uphold it properly, and so that they can install that blessing. I mean, grant those blessings to the people in the correct context, in the correct way, and so that it doesn't create more confusion. It actually helps solidify the teaching.
And I also, last thing, because we're out of time here, but last thing I would say is, if anyone else is in a situation where they desire a blessing, no matter what's happening in your life, you feel like you're alone, you feel like you're stuck in sin, you feel like you're in a rut in your spiritual life, you feel like you're lost, you don't know where to turn, you're in an irregular situation, you're in a same-sex relationship, you're not married, you're cohabitating, whatever. God's blessing is for everyone. God's grace, God wants to give. He's a loving Father. He's a good Father, and He wants to impart His blessing on people. So I don't think we should hide from that. And if there's something, if we have the right intention to come forward with an open heart and seek God's grace and open to God's transforming grace, then go ask for a blessing today. Go do it, because God's blessing is real. God's blessing is transformative. God's blessing is amazing. That's all I'm going to say today. So thanks for the conversation, and thanks for changing it up. I know this wasn't our plan to talk about it today, but
Merry Christmas.
We didn't have any problem filling this time with this episode. So if you have any questions or comments to add to our conversation, you can drop them in our social media. You can also send us an email at askus@thecatholicbuzz.com. And really, it's the fourth Sunday of Advent this Sunday, and Christmas coming up. So to all of our listeners, all of our viewers, on behalf of everyone behind the scenes and the three of us, we wish you a happy and a holy Christmas. So God's blessings to all of you. For Josh Sullivan and Matt Van Milligan, my name is Father Daniele. We'll see you next time on The Catholic Buzz.